mean I'll see it.
I don't go to the gym anymore. I don't even like looking at my own reflection when I'm getting out of the shower. People always talk about listening to your body, but they never tell you what to do when your body starts whispering back in a language you don't understand. I used to be one of those guys who was obsessed with fitness. Not the bodybuilder type, just someone who wanted to look lean and healthy. That's how this whole nightmare started, with a goal to lose a bit of stubborn weight that just wouldn't budge no matter how many miles I ran or how many salads I choked down. It was just a small bulge at first, right below my navel. I figured it was just bloating or maybe my posture was off. But as the months went by, the pooch became a hard, distended mass. It didn't feel like fat. When I pressed my fingers into it, the tissue felt dense, almost like there was a bag of wet ropes tucked behind my abdominal wall. I doubled my workouts. I went on a brutal calorie deficit. I was exhausted, constantly drained of energy, and yet that specific part of my stomach kept expanding. It looked ridiculous, like I had swallowed a small, lopsided melon while the rest of my ribs started to poke through my skin. The exhaustion was the worst part. I felt like a battery that couldn't hold a charge. I'd eat a massive meal and, within 20 minutes, my head would light up with a fog so thick I could barely stand. My vision would blur, and I'd feel this strange, rhythmic thumping in my gut. I told myself it was just my pulse, or maybe my digestion was struggling with the high-protein diet. But the thumping wasn't synced with my heart. It was slower, more deliberate. It felt like something was stretching, resettling itself in the cramped dark of my insides. I started having these dreams where I was being hollowed out from the inside. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my hands clutching my stomach, feeling a dull ache that seemed to radiate from my spine. Then the indigestion took a turn for the visceral. It wasn't just gas or a stomach ache. It was a sensation of movement. Not the fluttering of butterflies, but a slow, muscular sliding. If I sat very still in a quiet room, I could swear I felt something drag itself across the underside of my liver. The morning it all came to a head, I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, lifting my shirt to inspect the mass. The skin there was stretched so thin it looked translucent, marbled with angry purple veins I'd never noticed before. I felt a sudden, sharp cramp that sent me doubled over, gasping for air. It wasn't a normal cramp. It felt like a hook had been snagged in my lower intestine and someone was slowly, steadily reeling it in. I stumbled to the toilet, my vision swimming with black spots as my bowels turned to liquid. I thought I was just sick. I thought maybe I'd caught a virus. But as I sat there, the pulling sensation intensified. It felt like my very anatomy was being unspooled. I looked down between my knees, and my heart didn't just skip a beat, it felt like it stopped entirely. Protruding from me was a pale, grayish-white ribbon. It was flat, maybe half an inch wide, and it was moving. It wasn't falling out, it was pushing. It was slick with a yellowish mucus that carried a scent so foul it made my eyes water instantly. It didn't smell like rot or excrement. It smelled like wet, stagnant pond water and old, fermented meat. It was a primal, biological stench that triggered an immediate, gagging reflex in the back of my throat. I panicked. I reached down, my fingers shaking so violently I could hardly grip it. The texture was horrific. It was cold, rubbery, and segmented into thousands of tiny, vibrating ridges. The moment my skin touched it, the thing flinched. It tightened. I felt a sickening, sliding pressure deep inside my rib cage, as if the other end of the ribbon was anchored to the base of my throat. I started to pull. I know I shouldn't have, but the primal urge to get that thing out of me overrode every bit of common sense I had. As I pulled, the ribbon didn't end. It just kept coming. Foot after foot of pale, muscular meat coiled into the porcelain bowl. The pain was unlike anything I can describe. It felt like my organs were being rearranged, like my intestines were being grated from the inside out. I could feel the segments scraping against the lining of my gut, a slow, friction-filled crawl that made me want to scream, but all that came out was a wet, choked sob. The more I pulled, the more I realized how much of me wasn't actually me. The fat I'd been trying to burn off was disappearing in real time. My stomach was literally deflating as the coils exited. The bathroom floor was becoming a sea of white, tangled ribbon, glistening under the fluorescent lights. The smell was overpowering now, a thick, cloying miasma of internal fluids and the creature's own secretions. It filled my nostrils, coating my tongue with a taste of old iron and swamp gas. I was halfway through when I felt the resistance change. The head was stuck. I could feel it somewhere near my solar plexus, biting down. I felt a series of sharp, needle-like pricks deep in my tissue. The thing didn't want to leave its home. I had to brace my feet against the wall and tug with a steady, agonizing force. I felt something tear, a wet, muffled pop deep in my abdomen, and then, with one final, sickening slither, the rest of it slid out. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping, staring at the heap. It was nearly 30 feet long. A massive, tangled pile of parasitic muscle that had been living, eating, and excreting inside me for over a year. It lay there in the basin and on the tiles, occasionally twitching, its segments still trying to contract even though it was no longer anchored in its host. The most gut-wrenching part was seeing bits of my own half-digested meals still trapped in the translucent parts of its body. It had been stealing 40% of everything I ate, literally starving me while it bloated itself on my life force. I ended up in the ER, of course. The doctors were clinical about it, which somehow made it worse. They talked about Diphyllobothrium latum, the fish tapeworm, as if it were just a common nuisance. They gave me pills to kill any remaining larvae and checked for internal bleeding where the scolex, the head, had been hooked into my intestinal wall. They told me I was lucky it hadn't migrated to my brain or lungs. But the physical recovery was only the beginning. My stomach is flat now. The bulge is gone. But when I look at my midsection, all I see is a vacant house. The skin is still slightly bruised, a sickly yellowish-green color that reminds me of the creature's mucus. The horror didn't end when they incinerated the worm. It followed me home. Now, every time I feel a normal digestive rumble, I freeze. My blood runs cold and a prickling sensation crawls up the back of my neck. I'll be sitting on the couch, and I'll feel a tiny, rhythmic twitch under my ribs. The doctors say it's just phantom sensations or muscle spasms from the trauma my nerves went through. They say my body is just relearning how to function without a massive foreign object taking up space. But I don't believe them. Sometimes, late at night when the house is silent, I lay flat on my back and press my hands into my abdomen. I can feel the emptiness. But then there's a sensation, a faint, oily slide that moves from left to right, deep beneath the muscle. It feels exactly like a ghost wiggle. It feels like something is missing its roommate. Or worse, it feels like the roommate left something behind. A small, microscopic egg tucked into a fold of tissue, waiting for enough calories to start the cycle all over again. I haven't eaten a full meal in 3 weeks. I'm terrified that if I do, I'll just be feeding the next one. Every time I swallow, I imagine the food sliding down into the dark, into the waiting, mindless mouth of something that is more a part of me than I am. I look in the mirror and I don't see a person. I see a container. A fleshy, warm vessel that's just waiting to be filled by something pale, long, and hungry. The doctors can say whatever they want, but they didn't feel the pop. They didn't feel the way my organs shifted to fill the void. They don't know what it's like to realize that for 12 months, you weren't alone in your own skin. And the scariest part, I don't think I'll ever be alone again.
Next story.
I never really thought much about my skin. It's just there, right? A barrier between you and the rest of the world. But after what happened in that village near the border, I can't look at my own legs without feeling this sick, oily wave of nausea hitting the back of my throat. It's been months, and I still wake up in the middle of the night, clawing at my calves because I'm convinced I feel that sliding sensation again. It started as a blister. Nothing crazy, just a small, red, angry-looking bump on the side of my left ankle. I figured it was a heat rash or maybe a bite from some local insect I hadn't encountered yet. It burned, though. It didn't just itch, it felt like someone was holding a lit cigarette against my flesh, pressing it in deeper every time I took a step. The pain was sharp and acidic. By the third day, the area around the blister had turned a bruised, sickly shade of purple, and the skin was stretched so tight it looked like it was about to split. I tried to keep it clean, but the heat out there is oppressive. Everything is damp, everything is dusty, and your clothes just cling to you like a second, filthier skin. The only relief I could find was soaking my foot in the cool water of the local well run during the evenings. That was my biggest mistake. I didn't know then that the water is exactly what it wants. It needs the water to continue the cycle. The evening it finally hatched is burned into my brain. I was sitting on the edge of a stone basin, letting the cool water numb the fire in my ankle. Suddenly, the pressure reached a breaking point. The skin didn't just pop, it disintegrated. A small, jagged hole opened up, and the relief was instantaneous for about 3 seconds. Then I saw it. A tiny, translucent white tip poked out from the center of the wound. It looked like a piece of wet dental floss or a thick, pale thread. I reached down, thinking maybe a splinter or a piece of debris was finally working its way out. But as my fingers got close, the thread moved. It didn't just wiggle, it recoiled. It pulled back into my leg, disappearing under the flap of raw, open skin. My stomach did a slow, horizontal roll. That wasn't a splinter. That was something alive. The local medic, a guy who had seen too much and slept too little, didn't even look surprised when I showed him. He just sighed, reached for a small, smooth wooden stick, and told me to sit down. He explained it in a way that made my blood go cold. It was a guinea worm. It had been growing inside me for a year, coiled up in my connective tissue, feeding on me, maturing until it was ready to release its larvae. And now, it was 3 feet long, buried deep in the meat of my leg. "You cannot pull," he said, his voice flat and tired. "If it snaps, the body stays inside. It rots. You get the blood poisoning. You die." He took that little wooden stick and very carefully caught the head of the worm as it poked out to breathe. He did a single, slow half-turn, wrapping a fraction of an inch of the white creature around the wood. He then taped the stick to my ankle. That was the start of the longest 3 weeks of my life. The process is a slow-motion torture. You can only wind the stick when the worm is relaxed, which usually happens at night or when the limb is submerged. Every single day, I had to sit there and turn that stick. 1 inch. Maybe 2 if I was lucky. If I felt the slightest bit of resistance, I had to stop. If I forced it, the worm would break, and its internal fluids, this foul, milky substance, would leak into my muscle and trigger a massive infection. The worst part wasn't the hole in my ankle. It was the sensation of the movement. Imagine a long, thin wire being slowly threaded through your meat. Every time I turned that stick, I could feel the worm shifting. It wasn't just at the exit point, I could feel it sliding through my subcutaneous tissue, moving from my mid-calf down toward my heel. It felt like a cold, wet subterranean pulse. It was a rhythmic, agonizing slither that I could feel against my own bones. I stopped sleeping. I couldn't. I spent every night sitting upright in a plastic chair, staring at the stick taped to my leg. I was terrified that if I drifted off, I'd kick out in a dream or roll over and snap the creature. I could see the outline of it under my skin, a long, raised, winding track that looked like a varicose vein, except it moved. It was a map of my own infestation. By the second week, the smell started. It wasn't the smell of an open wound. It was something deeper and more ancient. It was the scent of wet, stagnant earth and spoiled protein. It reminded me of a basement that had been flooded for years, mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of raw meat that had been left out in the sun. It was the smell of something living inside something else that was trying to reject it. One night, around 3 a.m., I felt a sharp, electric jolt shoot up my leg. I looked down, and the worm was thrashing. I could see it whipping back and forth under the skin of my shin, creating these horrific, undulating waves. It wanted back in. It didn't want to be wound onto the stick anymore. I had to grip my own thigh with both hands, squeezing the muscle just to keep the leg still while I watched this parasite try to burrow deeper into my calf. I vomited right there on the floor, the bile mixing with the dust, but I didn't dare let go of the stick. The pain became a constant, humming background noise. My leg was swollen to twice its size, the skin shiny and translucent from the edema. I started to hallucinate from the sleep deprivation. I thought I could hear it. Not a sound in the air, but a vibration in my nerves. A low, wet dragging sound that echoed in my teeth. By the third week, I was a wreck. I was thin, gray-faced, and my eyes were bloodshot. The stick was now a thick bobbin of white, leathery parasite. There was only about 6 inches left. I could feel the tail end of it near my knee. It felt different now, tighter, more desperate. The final extraction happened on a rainy afternoon. I gave the stick one last, slow turn. I felt a weird, sickening pop deep inside my muscle, followed by a long, smooth sliding sensation that made my vision go dark for a second. And then it was out. 3 feet of ivory-colored, tubular muscle lay coiled around the wood in my hand. It was still twitching, even though it was no longer inside me. I looked at the hole in my ankle. It was a perfect, round tunnel leading into my body. It looked like a puncture from a large nail. The medic cleaned it and wrapped it, but the damage was done. Not to the leg, the physical wound healed eventually, leaving a puckered, star-shaped scar, but to my mind. Now, whenever I feel a muscle twitch or a stray hair brushes against my skin, I freeze. I can still feel that cold, rhythmic sliding. I can still smell that stagnant, earthy rot. I know it's gone, but sometimes, when it's very quiet and I'm lying in bed, I'm convinced I can feel another one. A tiny, burning itch deep in my hip, just waiting for the water. I don't go near the water anymore. I don't even like taking showers. Because I know what's under there. I know how easy it is for something to turn your own body into its home, and I know exactly what it feels like when it finally decides to leave. It doesn't just take your health, it takes the way you feel about being alive. You're never really alone in your own skin. You're just a host waiting for the next inhabitant.
Next story.
I used to be the kind of person who checked the stove 3 times before leaving the house. My friends called me safety first because I wouldn't even cross the street if the little green man was blinking. I lived in a constant state of low-grade static, a humming anxiety that kept me tucked away in a predictable, boring life. Then I found that cat. It was a scrawny, gray thing shivering behind a dumpster near my apartment. I took it in, got it cleaned up, and named it Smokey. I didn't think much of the small scratch I got on my forearm during its first bath, or the way the litter box always seemed to have a faint, cloying sweetness to the air that wasn't quite masked by the pine scent. A few weeks later, the static in my brain just stopped. It wasn't like a light switch flipping, it was more like a fog lifting. I woke up one morning and didn't feel the need to check the door lock. I felt light, unburdened. My coworkers noticed it first. I started speaking up in meetings, taking credit for my work, and even flirting with the barista at the coffee shop downstairs. Everyone told me how great I looked, how my newfound confidence was exactly what I needed. I believed them. I thought I had finally conquered my demons. But the confidence started to morph into something else. It became a hunger for friction. I started driving my old sedan like it was a stunt car. I'd find myself hitting 80 in a 40 zone, weaving through traffic with a grin plastered on my face. I wasn't scared. I couldn't even remember what fear felt like. It was as if the part of my brain that processed danger had been surgically removed and replaced with a craving for impact. I started walking through the worst parts of the city at 3 in the morning, not because I was brave, but because I felt an almost magnetic pull toward the shadows. I wanted someone to jump out at me. I wanted to see what would happen. The physical changes were subtle at first. I stopped liking the taste of cooked meat. I'd stand in front of the fridge at midnight, staring at a pack of raw chicken thighs, my mouth watering. The smell of raw meat didn't gross me out anymore. It smelled like iron and salt, like a primal necessity. One night, I found myself in the kitchen, lit only by the hum of the refrigerator. I was holding a steak knife, just pressing the tip into the pad of my thumb, watching the dark, thick crimson bead up and roll down my wrist. It didn't hurt. It felt like an itch being scratched. I licked the blood off my skin, and the taste was better than anything I had ever eaten in a restaurant. It had this deep, metallic richness, like licking a rusted penny, but warmer and more alive. I went to the doctor because I started having these blackouts. I'd be at my desk at work, and the next thing I knew, I'd be standing on the edge of a subway platform, toes hanging over the yellow line, watching the lights of the approaching train and feeling the frantic, vibrating energy in my chest. It wasn't a call of the void situation. It was a physical push. Something inside me was trying to throw me under those wheels. The blood work came back with a positive hit for Toxoplasma gondii. Most people have it. It's usually dormant. But in me, it had gone predatory. The doctor explained it in clinical terms, talking about neurotransmitters and dopamine spikes. He didn't see the horror of it. He didn't understand that I wasn't the one driving my body anymore. In rats, the parasite hijacks the brain. It rewires their circuitry so that the smell of cat urine, something that should trigger a flight response, becomes an aphrodisiac. They run toward the cat. They want to be caught. They want to be eaten so the parasite can get back into the cat's gut to breed. I'm a rat. That's all I am now. The bravery everyone praised was just the parasite making me reckless enough to get killed. It wants me to end up as a pile of wet organs on the pavement. It wants me to be consumed. And the worst part is, the more I know about it, the more I can feel it reacting. When I try to stay inside, my skin starts to crawl. It feels like thousands of microscopic threads are pulling at my muscles, forcing my legs to move, forcing me toward the door. Last night was the peak. I woke up in the middle of the night, but I couldn't move my arms. I was lying on the floor of my bathroom, staring at the tile. Smokey was sitting on the edge of the sink, watching me with those unblinking, glassy eyes. I realized then that the cat wasn't my pet. He was the landlord. He was waiting for the cycle to complete. I looked in the mirror and saw that the whites of my eyes were becoming shot through with broken vessels, turning them a muddy, bruised color. My skin looked thin, almost translucent, and I could swear I saw movement under the surface of my cheeks, a slow, undulating ripple like a worm moving through silt. I reached up to touch it, and my fingernail sliced right through the skin. There was no pain. Just that thick, dark fluid leaking out, smelling like an old basement and raw steak. I wandered out into the hallway, drawn by a sound I couldn't quite hear but could feel in my teeth. I ended up in the kitchen again. The knife was still on the counter. I picked it up, and my hand didn't shake. My hand was the steadiest it's ever been. I started to make small, precise cuts along my forearms. I wasn't trying to end it, I was trying to let it out. Or maybe I was just preparing the meat. The cuts were deep, exposing the pale, yellowish fat and the dark red muscle beneath. The sight of my own insides didn't make me sick. It made me hungry. I could see the pulse in my wrist, a frantic, jumping thing. I felt this overwhelming urge to open it up, to see the fountain. The parasite was screaming in my blood, a silent, vibrating frequency that demanded a climax. wanted the world to see what it had built inside me. I ended up at the local park, standing on the high bridge over the ravine. It's a long drop to the rocks and the shallow creek below. I stood on the railing, the wind whipping through my thin shirt. Usually, the height would have turned my stomach to lead, but I felt nothing but a calm, airy lightness. I looked down and didn't see death. I saw a destination. I saw the finish line. A jogger passed by and yelled something, probably asking if I was okay. I turned to look at him, and the expression on his face, that was the first time I felt a flicker of my old self. He looked absolutely terrified. He wasn't looking at a man, he was looking at a walking corpse with sliced arms and a manic, predatory grin. He scrambled away, reaching for his phone, and I just laughed. The laugh sounded wet, like there was fluid sitting in my lungs. I didn't jump. Not yet. Some tiny, screaming part of my original consciousness managed to pull me back down to the pavement. I crawled back home, leaving a trail of dark, sticky smears on the sidewalk. I'm locked in my bedroom now. I've barricaded the door, but it doesn't matter. The enemy isn't outside. It's woven into my gray matter. It's nestled in the folds of my brain, steering my thoughts, telling me that the knife feels good, telling me that the car is too slow, telling me that I am just a vessel for something much older and much hungrier than a human being. I can hear Smokey scratching at the bedroom door. It's not a normal cat scratch. It's rhythmic. Persistent. He knows I'm in here. He knows the parasite is ripening. I'm looking at my reflection in the window, and I don't recognize the person looking back. The eyes are too wide, the pupils blown out until there's almost no color left. I'm not brave. I'm not confident. I'm just a meal that hasn't realized it's been served yet. If you ever feel your anxiety suddenly vanish, if you feel a strange new courage that makes you want to dance on the edge of a rooftop, don't think you're lucky stars. Check your blood. Because something might be living inside you, rewriting your soul, just so it can watch you break. I can feel it moving again, right behind my eyes. It wants to go back to the bridge. And this time, I don't think I have enough of myself left to say no.
Next story. Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.